Die Sprachübertragung beginnt jetzt. Alle Teilnehmer befinden sich im Zuhörermodus.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to today's BAI webinar on the benefits of investing into renewables in the Nordics. I'm not alone, as usual. We partner up with great BAI companies. Today it's SEB Nordic Energy, and I welcome Elin Löfblad. Greetings to Stockholm. I hope you're doing great. Thanks for coming today and sharing your expertise with us. And Elin really knows what she's talking about. She does not only have 19 years of experience in the energy sector, she has a master in mechanical engineering. So that's kind of refreshing that we are getting first-hand information today from you. So thank you very much for taking your time for today's webinar. As always, most of you guys, it's not your first webinar at BAI for you today, so you can always address your questions to us, and in the end of the webinar, we will hold a short Q&A session where we will talk about and discuss all your questions, of course. The webinar, just for your information, will be recorded, and we will share the presentation slides after the webinar with you. So feel free to share the link, share the presentation also with your colleagues. We are happy if many people also watch the webinar in the coming weeks. So just a few remarks for upcoming BAI events. Of course, we have lots of webinars in the pipeline, but not only webinars, there are 6 more events in the BAI calendar this year. So we are happy, of course, to see you in Berlin for the BAI Innovations Day. And most of you are obviously interested in renewable energies as you tuned in today. So the BAI Real Asset Symposium is the go-to event for you, as well as the workshop on sustainable finance and ESG. I can only recommend to come to Frankfurt on the 13th and 27th of November and visit us, and lots of great panel discussions and presentations at both events. And also we have, I guess, 3 more BAI Insights this year. So feel free to just scan the QR code on the right side of the screen and get more information about our events, but not only our events, but events of partner organizations. And for lots of events, you will get a discount as BAI member. That's enough of opening remarks, I guess, for today. I keep it short as always and hand over to you, Elin, and for the audience, have fun and lots of information in the upcoming webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philipp. Well, let's start then. Let me just see. Yeah, it works also to change the slides. Well, Philipp just gave you a short background on who I am and also what we will discuss about today, or what I will talk about at least. And as Philipp also mentioned, I work as a portfolio manager today for a fund that invests into renewable energy in the Nordics. And we do direct investments in small-scale assets. So quite many of the examples I will show you today is from my daily work. And for those of you who does not really know SEB, I would just say a few words here. SEB is a leading North European corporate bank. It was established already in 1856 by the Bunnenberg family, and Bunnenberg is still very much involved in the company in SEB, and currently our largest shareholder. And SEB is one of the largest asset management houses in Europe, 246 billion euros in asset under management, and we have been ranked as top asset manager in the Nordic region for 4 consecutive years, most recently this year, 1 or 2 weeks ago, we got that news. So we were very happy about that. And going more then into the topic of today, I don't know how much you know about the Nordic energy market, but I will try to sort of sum up the main characteristics of the Nordic energy market, both sort of where we are today, a bit historically as well, and going forward. The Nordics, well, as you probably know, the Nordic regions constitutes of 4 countries. It's Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland. And the Nordics has a very sort of long history of, I would say, fossil-free electricity mix. On the right-hand side, you can see in the diagram that during 2023, which was sort of the latest numbers that we have, and it looks a bit similar over the years, I would say, we have a lot of hydropower in the Nordic energy system. And I will also talk a little bit more on how that sort of gives us quite many benefits, and what we can what we are able to do in the Nordic region with the large amount of hydro that we have in the system. So you can see here that we are almost fossil-free, 96% fossil-free electricity mix. The region is also a net exporter of electricity, both towards the continent and UK. We are also very ambitious regarding our net zero targets. Some of the countries in the Nordics, like for instance Norway, they have set their net zero targets already 2030, and then Sweden and Finland and Denmark will follow before 2050. We also are a region known for larger industries. Sweden, for instance, has a big mining industry, also steel production, as well as other type of companies like pulp and paper mills, etc. And these are industries that are very energy intense. And this was also why we paved the way for PPAs in the Nordics. Nordics actually pioneered corporate PPAs. This was in 2013. One of my former employers, Ox2, they made a PPA agreement between Allianz and Google for Google's data center in Finland, where wind power from Ox2's wind farm there supplied Google with clean electricity. And we are also one of the most integrated energy systems in the world. If you look into the Nordic region, we have a lot of interconnectors between the countries. We are very stable, rule-based. We have very stable rule-based regulation. We have Nordpool from the 1990s, and we also have a very transparent liquid market like Nasdaq with robust forward derivatives. And Nordic region, I mean, with this stability, with a high demand, is really on top globally for venture capital impact investments. And energy is one of the top dominating asset types there. Going forward then, our net zero ambitions that we have set are very high ones. Of course, this will require a lot of electrification in the Nordics. We have a lot of industry flagship projects, as you probably are aware of. I can just mention a few. We have fossil-free steel production, like Hybrid and Stegra, formerly known as H2 Green Steel. We also have the mining industry wanting to electrify, and the Kiruna mine up north in Sweden is wanting to electrify, which will require a huge sort of additional demand of renewable electricity. Also, data centers are very much popping up in the Nordics. Since it's a very stable region, low electricity prices, that this is also very very good for the data center companies to actually be in. So going forward, we will see a huge increase in demand. On the right-hand side, we are showing a projected energy demand. These are numbers that are a bit old, but they are still valid. In 2023, different companies in the Nordics made a sort of a projection of what do we need to achieve, how much demand will be required in the Nordics if we should sort of go to or be able to reach the net zero targets. And by then, it was an increase from 400 terawatt hours in 2022 to a double energy demand in 2045, 800 terawatt hours. And as you can understand, this is a very, very high increase, which will of course also affect electricity prices, etc., going forward. However, lately we have seen wind power development been slowing down. It's been on the rise for quite many years. Both Sweden and Finland has been building quite many wind parks. Denmark is of course known for a lot of wind in the system with a very sort of incremental growth. But now we can actually see that the wind business is facing a lot of challenges. This is both for existing wind owners. We have, and I will show you that on the next slide, but we have been having quite low electricity prices. In the beginning of this year, we also saw that all the renewable electricity price prognoses were actually lowering their long-term electricity price in the nearest years to come with 20 to 25%. So of course, a lot of wind owners today are suffering from that. They are also suffering a bit from, or at least some are suffering from the constructed PPAs, which also now is sort of affecting the PPA market. Also, new built larger wind farms are facing quite many challenges in the Nordics. The permitting process has been very lengthy. I think Sweden, the mean time for getting a new permit in Sweden has been around 9 years. It's much faster in the continent. I think Finland is one of the countries in the Nordics that has been the most fastest, and they are around sort of 6 years to get a permit for a wind park. Also, with the last year's increase in material costs, we have been seeing also a lot of bottlenecks in logistics and several different aspects that also are challenging the more new build projects. Also, when it comes to permits, we saw a lot of permits being declined during last year. In Sweden, there were, I think, 14 offshore projects, whereof 13 was stopped by the military veto. So nowadays we see, or currently we see actually a bit of a slowdown in the new built larger projects in Sweden, which will of course also have an impact on the projected sort of demand going forward. We have also had a bit of a sort of grid congesting in the north to south, both in Sweden and in Norway. In Sweden and in Norway, we have different price areas. So in order to transport the electricity, you really need to have sort of a well-functioning grid. And unfortunately, we have not had that because we have had a huge development of new built wind and solar, etc. We have also been shutting down nuclear in Sweden, etc., which is also affecting sort of the grid capacity. So even though we have seen for the last year that we have had this grid congestions, the TSOs in the Nordics are working very heavily on investing in the grid. So it's improving, and also interconnection in the countries are increasing. We have also seen a new debate about nuclear power in Sweden, and the recent government is pushing this very hard. Last year, they actually changed the Swedish law in order to allow for new nuclear power plants in Sweden, removing the 10 reactor cap that we have had. And this year, we also had, during May, I think it was, we also had this, the state came up with a risk sharing model And this is, of course, needed in order for nuclear to be built in Sweden. So it's a contract for different style support, and the state will be offering nuclear power development a certain sort of electricity price, which is required because nuclear power will be expensive if we will build new nuclear in Sweden. So this slowdown, it is here. We have seen that larger deal activity in the Nordics has currently slowed down a bit. However, we see that going forward, this will sort of once again be faster again. All these sort of challenges that we see for wind, for instance, with permitting processes, we are seeing that much is done currently for new contract for difference schemes in Denmark for offshore, as an example. We also see new auction processes in Finland that will sort of come this year. And also Sweden is working a lot with having a better permitting process for wind. So going forward, we will see a sort of an ease for new developers of larger energy infrastructure projects going forward. But it has been a bit slow during the last years. And I mentioned the electricity price, and I think this is something worth knowing. I guess you've all heard that we have had quite low electricity price in the Nordics for a long time. And yes, the prices in the Nordic has been really low. In the diagram here on the slide, you can see the historical electricity price. The dark green staple bars is the average monthly Nordic system electricity price. We have a lot of price areas in the Nordic, but this is the sort of the monthly average of all these. So the dark green staple bars is the year 2000 up to 2020, where we have a yearly average on 27 euros per megawatt hour. So this is sort of the level which I'm quite used to. The electricity price should be around this sort of 27 to 30 euros per megawatt hour. However, when we had this invasion in Ukraine, of course, the energy system collapsed in many ways, which also, of course, affected the Nordics. And we saw really elevated prices, both on the continent, of course, but also here in the Nordics, which we were very sort of not used to. The larger industries that I talked about earlier, of course, they are suffering a lot from higher electricity prices since they are very energy intense. So you can see here that during 21 to 23, we had a yearly average of 79 euros per megawatt hour, which is really abnormal. And this is why we want to show them in different staple bars. We have added also the year 2024 as a gray line. And here you can see that it's going down to more normal levels, also including 2025. We are also sort of getting down lower to more historical levels on the electricity price. What you cannot see in the staple bars is that we have sort of a very normal seasonal effect in the electricity price. We have a higher price in the spring when the demand is high, and we have a lower electricity price during summer when the demand is low. The weather is, it's not that cold, and of course the Swedish and also sort of all the Nordic holidays, we have this sort of long holidays in the summer, so the industries are not working 100%. So, but you can see that effect in the 2024 and the 2025 years prices. And Nordic region is also very dependent when it comes to, since we have a lot of hydro in the system and also a lot of wind, of course, the electricity price will be very much affected also on how much water we have in the system, how much the wind is blowing, etc. We have the nuclear power in both in Sweden and Finland, but when they are under service, etc., that also affects the electricity price a lot. So we will have this sort of normal higher and lower prices. But what has also happened during the last years is that we have seen an increased amount of negative hours on the electricity price. So the price volatility is very much differing. I would say Finland is on top when it comes to the number of negative price hours during a year. Finland has 8% of the hours of the year that are negative. And this has to do with a lot of wind in the system. Sweden is not that far away. We are also having quite many hours during the year that is on a negative price, but it's not as worse as in Finland. So this is something that when investing in the Nordics, you really need to sort of consider how the energy sector is changing and how the electricity price is also being affected by this. More volatile electricity prices is something that we will see more of. So new sort of investment strategies is a must. And we also see that for wind, for example, I mean, the electricity prices, of course, going up and down, but we can also see that the capture prices are getting are worsening, so to speak, especially for wind. So the risk for merchant capture price has been increasing a lot over the years as well. So this is something that we really need to include going ahead when investing into these type of assets in the Nordics. And going forward, we at least, or I in my daily work, I'm not expecting the sort of elevated prices going forward. There will be sort of a period in time, maybe, I shouldn't say, but maybe within 5 to 7 years, we will see an increase in the electricity price. And this is where the larger industry projects, the flagship projects, when they materialize, we will see a very fast demand of new or more electricity. And this is also when the prices will go up. But of course, when the electricity price go up, more energy projects will be built, and then the price will sort of go down again. And before I jump to the next slide, I can just sort of talk a little bit about where sort of the break even for different type of new technologies are when looking to the energy price. To build new onshore wind, it costs, I mean, break even for that is approximately sort of 40 euros per megawatt hour. So here you can see that, well, new built onshore projects, that is viable today. However, if you look at offshore, that is more in the area of 80 euros per megawatt hour. And during the crisis years in 21 to 23, of course, a lot of projects, offshore projects were sort of started up. But now when the prices has gone down again, we don't really see that it's possible without subsidiaries, at least, to build sort of larger offshore wind parks. Looking into nuclear, that's even higher. That is between 100 to 120 euros per megawatt. So that is very much a sort of state subsidiary that must come into the picture in order for new nuclear to come into the system. So before jumping into sort of the next theme, I would sort of sum up my last slides with, I mean, the Nordics is a very stable region. It has a lot of opportunities ahead. But what needs to be considered is that currently the climate for larger energy infra projects, it's a bit tough. This will ease up. But one thing to really consider going forward is that you really need, when investing in the Nordics, to think about sort of how will merchant capture risk affect my investments, and sort of the further need for flexibility in order to sort of handle this negative price hours going forward. How will that be handled? So this is why we look into very much repowering and also sort of system optimizations. There is today a lot of already existing assets in the Nordics. Quite many are small assets, and we see a very large potential in acquiring these type of assets, upgrading them, and producing more electricity. And this means that we already have the permits. The permits are already in place, no sort of lengthy permitting process is needed. We have also the grid connection, which is also very positive. I mentioned sort of the grid congestion issues before, and this is also a bit something that's been quite tough in the Nordics nowadays, to also get a new grid connection for your assets. And by also entering these type of sort of existing assets, you don't need to exploit any more new land. There is no NIMBY effect, not in my backyard effect, since these are assets that have been standing there for quite some time already. So the people living around these assets, they are very much used to them, to see them. And also repowering means that you can actually reuse a larger volume of the material and keeping CO2 emissions to a minimum. And by keeping as much material as possible, but exchanging turbines, if we take wind as an example, you keep the foundation, you keep the tower, you have all the roads, you have all the permits, but what you do is that you change the turbine, the nacelle, and also sometimes you can also change the blades, depending on on the state they're in. And by also adding in then new, more efficient turbines, you can actually increase the number of full load hours because they can capture more wind. So you can have a lower sort of power in your turbine, but still producing much more production from the site. And we see that we have a really large potential, both within wind and hydro. We look towards the small scale assets. There is currently quite many sort of small scale wind parks in Sweden that are sort of 10 to 15 years old. We also look into hydropower. We also have, since I mentioned already before, we have a lot of hydro in system already in these countries. So these are assets that are old, that needs sort of these upgrades. And I also, if you look at sort of how much could we actually increase then? Well, I can mention a report that came out from a consultants company called AFRY here in Sweden. They looked at the potential of upgrading hydropower in Sweden. They include both large-scale hydropower that are up in the north with huge dams, but also the small-scale hydropower that has a more continuous flow located in the southern parts of Sweden. And they saw that there is a hidden potential in hydropower up to 4,000 megawatt, meaning sort of 3.5 nuclear reactors. And if we should sort of do everything we can to upgrade these assets up to 2035, that would add 1 nuclear reactor to the Swedish energy system to 1/3 of the cost for nuclear. So there is a very, very large potential in these assets, and you shouldn't sort of forget that, not looking too much towards new build projects. We need them as well going forward. We will definitely need them. But when we have a time with challenges for new build larger projects, the small scale existing asset has a very good upgrade potential. And I also mentioned that we also shouldn't sort of we should really need to sort of be careful about negative electricity pricings and also capture price risk. So you need to look into your asset portfolio as a system. You shouldn't look into each asset as an own silo. And this is sort of what will be key ahead in order to sort of increase revenues on your portfolio. I have tried to summarize this in a slide. I know it could look a bit complex, but I will try to guide you through it. And if we start with sort of how you can regulate different assets, this is an example, and it's sort of an example from our portfolio that we have in my fund that I'm working with. We have wind power and we have hydropower. We also have grid-connected batteries in our portfolio. And in order to sort of support the net zero ambitions, we of course need to produce more electricity into the system. So this is what we do with wind and hydro. And this is small scale that we upgrade. We do these repowerings on both wind and hydropower. Wind, it's very tough to regulate. You have a low possibility to regulate the wind. I mean, the wind, when the wind is blowing, you produce from the wind. What you need to do now when we see these high amount of negative price hours is that you need to add on technology so you can shut the windmills off when we have negative pricing, so you don't need to pay these unbalanced costs that we see have been ruining the finances for a lot of wind owners over the years. But hydropower, here, even though we are working with small scale assets that doesn't have these sort of larger dams, we can still regulate these hydropowers. They are called run-of-rivers, so they have a continuous flow. You need to have some flow through the water turbines all the time, but you can regulate. You can do a regulation on a daily basis. So you can see when the wind is blowing, we can hold the water for a few hours until the electricity prices go up a bit, and then you can release the water. So by having these different type of assets, you can actually choose when you want to produce from which asset type. And I've talked a lot about sort of the grid and the number of electricity hours, etc. I mean, one thing that is affecting when you have more intermittent energy production assets in the energy system, the grid needs balancing services, and this is what batteries can do on a very short period of time. Hydropower also has this possibility, but grid-connected batteries is much faster than hydropower. You can shut them on and off very quickly. So in the last years, quite many new services to the grid has been coming up because you need them to stabilize the grid, and this is where batteries come into the picture. So by looking at your portfolio with different asset type, producing from different assets when they should, and holding or storing electricity in other assets, you can actually get a very high system premium on your portfolio. I have no numbers here on the slide, but looking at both working with upgrades and also working with system optimization, you can actually increase your equity IRR with 200-300 bips, if not more, depending on what type of assets you have and how you choose to sort of have your operating strategy. On the bottom here on the slide, you can also see that having different assets in your portfolio, you can also have several different revenue streams from each asset. One thing that will be very important going forward will be sort of reconstructing a new type of PPAs. And with batteries, we see that going forward, it will be very much important to actually have batteries together with your assets, offering hybrid PPAs that is very much discussed all over the world currently. So summing this up, you can increase your return profile by working very actively with your portfolio, both with upgrades, but also to really actively optimize the system, not looking at your assets as silos, but to see them as a system. And it's this flexibility that will be key going forward when we will see the energy system changing more and more. I've just added an example. You will get these slides later on so you can read for yourself. But this is an example of a repowering case that we have been doing. This is in Sweden. It's a wind park located in southern parts of Sweden. So here you can see that we are changing the turbine on the old sort of tower on that site. It goes quite quickly. takes a few weeks to actually do this. The process is longer, of course, looking both at renegotiating land leases, etc. But just changing the turbine, the technology goes quite quickly. And this means that we can actually produce more electricity in a very short period of time. On this project, we have a portfolio of 10 turbines. This is the picture is showing one of them, but we see that we are able to produce more than double the electricity by refurbishing this wind park. Going to the last section, I've been talking a lot of hydropower, and hydropower is very important for the energy system. So I just want to sort of further highlight how important hydropower is, both on the sort of large scale, of course, but also on the small scale side. And I mean, hydropower is very sort of known in the Nordics. We have, if you look at the diagram on the right-hand side, you can see that in 2023, Norway had 89% of their production from hydropower. So Norway is really a sort of a big battery in that sense, because what hydropower can do is, I would say, almost the same type as a battery, but for a longer time. Battery can store in energy for a short time, and hydropower can store energy for a longer period, depending on the size of the hydropower plant and if it has a dam or not. Sweden is not as big as Norway, but we have 40%, which is a really sort of significant backbone to our system. And this means that with sort of this high amount of hydro in the system, and as the Nordic system also is very much interconnected, we can allow for more intermittent technology. So hydropower is, I would say, very important for the Nordic. It's one of the oldest energy production technologies. Some of the assets are up to 100 years old. And we had some, and I think at least I get some questions on that when I talk about hydropower to many investors, that well, isn't this very much destroying nature, destroying ecosystems, etc.? And I would say, yes, all energy technology asset types, they are affecting, of course, the surrounding nature and ecology. And of course, this is what the environmental permit should consider. And this was very much debated in Sweden in the 1970s, which in one way sort of paved the way for the EU Water Act. And what the EU Water Act is saying is that all hydropower plants need to have modern environmental permits. So currently we have, both in Sweden and Finland, environmental reconsideration process. So all the hydropower in both Sweden and Finland needs to upgrade their environmental permits to modern standards. So this is something that the hydropower will go through in this country. In Norway, they already have this modern environmental standards. They have another focus on hydro. They are also building new hydro, which is not allowed either in Sweden or in Finland. And looking into small-scale hydropower, which is what we are aiming for, this is one of the lowest carbon intensities of all energy production technologies. They do not have these large dams requiring a lot of concrete, etc. And small-scale hydropower is also very important for local grid stabilization. I also mentioned that many small-scale plants in the Nordics can be upgraded for more capacity, but also faster control to capture reserve premiums, meaning that we can have a very active water management on these run-of-river hydropower plants. So, summing up a bit, I mean, hydropower has a very sort of good characteristics, because it's a renewable energy production, it has a high availability and also a very long lifetime. I mentioned that some of the assets we acquire they could be 100 years old, but I say the most are 50 to 7 years old. And they produce these run-of-river plants. They produce the most when we also have the highest demand of electricity. So they have the seasonal production that follows really the demand of electricity, meaning that they will capture the highest price hours. And the upgrade potential is substantial, as I have already mentioned. And this dispatchability characteristic, saving the water or holding the water, and releasing it when we have higher electricity price, that actually increase the profile factors a lot for these asset types. And we also are looking at hybrid sites for hydropower, meaning that we can co-locate battery energy storages behind the meter, not the grid connected batteries. You can do a lot with them as well, but by also adding smaller batteries to the sites, we can also additionally work with sort of holding water, but also storing kilowatt hours behind the meter. We also look at co-locating smaller solar panels at these sites, because during summertime, where you don't have a large water flow, we still need to rotate the turbines. And this has been historically done with electricity. So by adding in solar panels, we don't need to take electricity from the grid, and we can sort of produce that by solar ourselves at these sites. And these are very small installations. But by also further increase the efficiency on the site, we can increase the revenues on these assets even further. Here I also have an example. This was one of our first acquisitions that we did in Sweden. It's a power plant called Biskopsberg, located in the southern parts of Sweden. And this is, I would say, a typical case of a small size hydropower. This is one of the larger small scale ones. This specific asset has been identified as a very strategic resource in the region, since it can produce, if something would happen to the grid, they will still have this power plant that could sort of support in sort of restarting the grid, and also offering production if the system is malfunctioning. Because on this side we can actually have this island mode production, meaning that you don't need to have the grid producing electricity for us in order to produce on this power plant. So here we have upgraded. There were 2 turbines on this power plant when we acquired it. We removed those old turbines, they were a bit malfunctioning, and actually put in an extra turbine, which we could do according to the environmental permits. So here we have increased the production, the yearly production, with approximately 40%. So talking really fast and also summing up, so we will have also some times for Q&As. I would say, looking into Nordics, there is a big potential going forward. But something that which I mentioned that you need to look into, is that flexibility and system optimization will be very much important going forward. The energy system is getting more complex, so there will be an investment shift. And you need also to have a very sort of strategic plan to work with your asset going forward. And this is why we work a lot with repowering, with small scale assets that already are existing, and we have the permits, etc. And we are also then focusing a lot on hydropower, which I have been talking a lot about, but hydropower is a very important asset type in the Nordic, and also unlocks clean energy growth, because without the large hydro production in the Nordics, we could have not been able to adding that much intermittent power into the Nordic system. So with that said, thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to present, and looking forward to some difficult questions here then.
Thank you very much, Elin. Yeah, I received a lot of questions actually. First of all, for all of you who tuned in later. Of course, you will get the presentation slides and also the recording via email from us. And in a few days, you will also find everything on our homepage. So no worries at all. So let's start in the beginning. You were talking about the increased volatility in electricity prices, and I received a few questions about your estimations of prices in the future. So first of all, can you please repeat your estimation for the prices to break even in the different energy forms, onshore, offshore?
Yes, of course, yeah. Yeah, I can do that. And of course, it's really approximation depending on several different things. But I would say if we look at onshore projects for wind, a rough estimation for break-even is 40 euros per megawatt hour. For offshore, it's the double, 80 euros per megawatt hour. And for nuclear power, even higher, 100 to 120. So with those numbers, you easily understand that today building offshore is difficult. You can do it with, of course, PPAs, but it is difficult. You need state subsidiaries for those type of projects in the current environment, I would say.
And
but projects are still being built, of course, but sometimes you wonder how do they do this?
Regarding to the wind farms, how do you see the future of baseload PPAs from a banking perspective? The question from the audience is, or the remark from the audience is, that a lot of baseload PPA agreements have recently experienced financial problems with the high volatility.
Yes. Well, I mean, the industry in Sweden, they still want to have the baseload, of course. They want to be able to plan how much the action will cost and how much the projects will cost. So they still want to have the baseload, but wind power producers today don't want to offer baseload. We have entered a pay-as-produced PPA, and of course, also depending sort of how you set that up, of course. But I would say going forward, what will be key is this hybrid PPAs that I talked about very shortly. Combining wind with batteries is one way to set up hybrid PPAs, and also more than one asset, of course. But that could just be an example. The PPA that we have set up is actually together with a company called Flower. So what they do is that they have their own batteries, so they can offer the industry baseload PPAs. But we are very careful with PPA structures, and we would not enter baseload PPA today.
Okay, good info. And maybe to refer to your elaboration on nuclear power plants in Sweden. I mean, there's a lot of political support I see, but do you also see interest from institutional investors to finance new projects, and if so, under which circumstances?
Well, I would say that it's not very common. The investors that I meet is, of course, more interested in renewable technologies. I mean, nuclear is fossil free. I'm not sort of against nuclear. I think it's expensive to build. So will be expensive for the Swedish taxpayers going forward. I have met a few, but I couldn't really sort of say how they would be interested in that. Yeah, maybe not a good answer, but tough one to answer. I mean, the state, I guess, should be the one supporting that going forward. It's such a complex technology, and it's very, very costful. So I would not say for institutional investors, but it's a lot of risks with investing into nuclear.
Yeah, and I think we can say that it's at least questionable if it's helping about or for greater price stability and lowering the system costs. I mean, that's probably the #1 argument in Sweden, but I mean, we saw a lot of or high volatility in prices since the Russian war in Ukraine, and you're not at all dependent from oil or gas. So there are probably also other factors in play.
Yeah, several different factors that the electricity went up. I mean, we are interconnected to the continent. We are also very much affected, of course, what happens on the continent. And this is one of the reasons why the prices went up a lot. We also had some issues with our nuclear power production over these years. And I mean, the nuclear power also on the continent were suffering due to the fact that we had really warm weather. The cost on biofuels went up also a lot because we have some power plants on renewable fuels. So I would say it was sort of really the perfect storm for the energy system, what happened during these years.
Good. Let's continue. I have a lot of remarks and questions about repowering and system optimization. So first of all, it's not a question, but rather a remark from the audience. So you're talking about repowering or renewing the turbines and the blades. So what is your estimation? How many of, or what's the percentage of total wind energy production that can be refurbished by just only renewing blades and turbines, or do you also need to build a new foundation, new towers, because new blades are much bigger and heavier than old ones?
Well, we are focusing on smaller assets, meaning that they are below 150 meters. So we stay below that limit, because otherwise we would need new permits. So we don't have that sort of challenge with larger turbines and bigger blades, because we are sort of aiming to fit in those 150 meters. If I can say an example, I mean, we have identified 2,000 windmills in Sweden that we could do the sort of repowering on. This sort of soft repowering that we say, only changing the turbines and the blades. And that would sort of amount to a increase in sort of production with 4 terawatt hours per year. And this can be compared with the electricity production in Sweden, or the energy consumption in Sweden, that is approximately 140 terawatt hours. So 4 compared to 140. So I mean, it's not that much, but still it's better to reuse what you already have in the system, especially now when it's really tough for larger new builds. But we still need the larger projects going forward in order for us to reach our net zero targets in the Nordics.
Okay, and a short add-on. So what's the average age of the turbines you have refurbished?
10 to 15 years, I would say. So, I mean, for example, we acquired a park that had very bad technology installed. Companies that had gone bankrupt, but got bankrupt for a long time ago. So these were technology that was not that good from the start. It was actually a German turbine producer and a Chinese turbine producer. So for those typical projects, they were really malfunctioning. We also acquire other sites that has sort of Vestas or Nordics turbines. Here we see that we will upgrade, but we will still wait a few years before we do the upgrade, because the technology is still holding. We try to use refurbished turbines, so not new turbines, also trying to save or minimize the CO2 even more. And They are very good. It's a bit hard to get on hold of them, but they're really good. And the lifetime of the guarantee on those is 25 years.
Okay, Roland, maybe we can show slide 10 again, because there's a specific question for slide number 10. We were talking about system premium. Can you please elaborate?
Yes. The complex slide, yes.
Yeah. So would it be possible to quantify the described system premium in percentage points?
Well, I mentioned it when I presented, but I mean, you get equity IRR sort of increases when you do the repowering cases. That differs a lot, of course, on the assets and how they look like, and we of course examine that on every transaction that we do. But on a sort of when you also add in sort of the system premium, I would say on a total around sort of 200 to 300 bips increase is not uncommon. It could even be higher.
And to add on, one question from the audience, he or she is surprised to hear that the positive statements on repowering also holds for the very small scale projects. So it would be interesting how those are still economic at those levels.
Yes, it is. I mean, since we are keeping as much as possible, also acquiring assets that has been, sometimes it's been parks that has gone bankrupt. We have also had a time now when a lot of wind producers has been going to quite a rough period. So we have been acquiring these assets at a very good price, I can say.
Maybe to close this chapter, one last question. So your power providers are probably spread out over a huge area in the country or in the Nordics in general. So how are you securing it against any form of sabotage?
Well, we are working with, we have sort of service and maintenance organizations, third and second and first line, second line, and third line. The first line is really local people. So we really sort of rely on these sort of local people. It could be the former owners of these assets, could be the people that we are having these land lease agreements with. I mean, sabotage, I wouldn't say that these smaller assets are really that in a high risk of sabotage. Different type of sabotage, of course, but I would say if you look into sort of national security, the larger assets are more in the risk of sabotage. I worked at Vattenfall for several years, and this is ongoing every day. Sabotage from, I would say, other countries outside the EU. So this is, of course, very important. But for smaller assets, they are not really in the picture of sabotaging as much as the large-scale assets.
Okay, and maybe one last question about hydropower. So how can we put your statements into perspective as in that region it seems that large projects or projects at all are limited, and new projects are very limited available in the market?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, I mean, we have seen a slowdown on large projects, meaning, I mean, since I talked about that, but larger projects are suffering, both new development projects, but small scale, we see that we have a very sort of different situation. As I mentioned, for wind, a lot of wind producers, they want to get rid of their assets. Also, if it's sort of old assets that need upgrade, they don't want to spend that money on them. And the same goes for hydropower, since hydropower is also going through this reconsideration process for modern environmental permits. A lot of owners also realize that going forward, we will be needed to install fish migration paths, etc., in order for us to have modern environmental permits. So it's really been sort of a time where a lot of sellers of small-scale assets has been really on the market, but larger deals has been slowing down.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we used this 1 hour pretty well and efficiently. Thank you very much for your presentation and also your elaboration and the Q&A session, Elin.
Of course.
It was a pleasure for me, and thanks for tuning in,
Thank you.
everyone, and have a great day.
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity. Hope you had some interesting time listening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.